Welcome to Inking Neon. Inking Neon is your spark in the dark. Veteran storytellers weave decades of writing, journalism, teaching, and imagination into fuel for your soul. Each episode brings you guest authors, book recs, deep craft talk, and luminous readings designed to help your own words glow brighter. I'm Cullen McHael. I'm an independent sci-fi and fantasy author based out of Iowa.
And I'm Stuart J, also out of Iowa, the lovely sort of rolling hills of southeast Iowa, and also a science fiction writer.
Today we're talking about fight scenes.
Yeah, we love fight scenes. We love a good execution of a fight scene. They're really essential in fantasy and science fiction writing. So we're going to sort of examine why that is and really think about what makes a really good action scene. What do you need to put together? How do you deliver it? And what makes it good?
Well, this is one of the main questions that I've seen people bring up over and over again at convention after convention is how do you get a really compelling fight scene compared to sort of the rubber action hero nonsense that can so easily take over when authors are careless. So first question, why fight scenes? It seems like in speculative fiction, there's a close overlap between speculative fiction and adventure fiction. So seeing fight scenes in speculative fiction doesn't seem like it would be automatic, but it does seem like in speculative fiction, cyberpunk, sci-fi, you're going to see some fight scenes. What do you suppose that is?
I think it's because if you think about the fundamental structure of speculative fiction, a fantasy novel, science fiction novel, 99% of the time, or maybe 95% of the time, internal structures is of rival hierarchies.
Rival worldviews.
Rival worldviews, rival hierarchies of power, rival hierarchies of different kinds of power. Power might be external, military equipment, governments, laser blasters, spaceships. The power can also be internal, like, the power of the Force, for instance, in Star Wars, or other internal psychic powers and a whole range of different powers that are internal. But in some fundamental sense, you're going to have different hierarchies, and they're going to be, in opposition. So classically in cyberpunk, you have the people who are under the oppression of big kind of corporate political bodies. Think about Blade Runner. Governments maybe have been taken over by commercial enterprises. Government is now run by corporations. There's a huge number of, elites which are incredibly well off, and there's something of a somewhat underworld or the rest of society that's not faring as well at all and is a little oppressed and is tightly controlled, right? So right there, you're going to have the hierarchy of the power structure that's on top, but you'll have the hierarchy of the underworld, the rebels, the people who are fighting it, or the people who want to fight it, or the underrepresented, the oppressed, and all the rest of it. Actually, maybe that's where we're heading. Maybe we are heading towards cyberpunk more and more.
Certainly in the UK, that seems to be a conscious effort to build a hyper cyberpunk dystopia. Don't build the pain nexus, we said, but we do seem to be trying to build it.
Right, and we have the companies which are the tech billionaires and their influence over politics and everything. It's like more than ever before. It's like the unfolding of the beginning of what's setting up the world before Blade Runner, or the world before many science fiction novels, in a way.
So what I hear you saying is that, in your opinion, the idea of fight scenes is sort of systemically part of the concept of speculative fiction, because speculative fiction is speculating ultimately about different worldviews, which will tend to be in conflict. And the conflict is ultimately, at some point, someone's going to try at least to resolve that with violence, if history is any indicator. Does that sound like kind of a good summary of?
Yeah, it is. And if in terms of the speculative element, okay, we're going to take, like we do in science fiction and fantasy, more so in sci-fi. We don't currently have, decade or so ago, military didn't have laser weapons. Now they do. Maybe eventually they'll have laser guns, plasma weapons. You take the technology and then you're going to play with it. And you're going to think, well, ask that question. What is it really like if you have a military that's equipped with plasma weapons, very powerful laser weapons, everything driven by very sophisticated AI, so that they think faster than humans, they fight faster than humans. The amazing thing is all these things are beginning to happen. I think that's an interesting feature about this conversation today, right? We're already, a lot of people, I just looked at a survey that 60% of people are worried about AI. And one of the reasons is because of losing control. And maybe it gets matched with high-end drones and weapons that can think for themselves and carry out orders and so on. Before you know it, you're like in the terrain of Skynet in Terminator, right?
We've spent most of our lives reading speculative fiction that's trying to warn us about the dangers of these things, and yet here we are barreling forward building them. I would say I have a slightly different take on why fight scenes in speculative fiction. I'd say there are two reasons that it boils down to, and they are distinct from each other. One is that it's fun. We think it's cool, which is a sort of a silly answer, but it's the whole answer. We're here to write entertainment, and sometimes we think fights are cool. We think boxing's fun. We think MMA is cool. We think seeing highly skilled people engage in martial encounters can be satisfying and engaging. It can be titillating, or it can just be technically interesting. So there's a spectacle element to it. The other answer, which is which is very different, is that when people, and which is more like your answer, I think, is that when people have a lot on the line, they're going to reach for the tools to get what they want. And legitimate conflicts of interest that arise throughout human history, someone is going to try violence. It is a fairly effective way of getting what you want. So if your stakes are high enough and your characters are invested enough, then it's one of the several things that may happen. And in adventure fiction, it tends to be kind of emphasized, largely, I think, for the first reason, because we think it's cool. So it doesn't have to be. There are speculative fiction novels. I can think of two off the top of my head. Speaker for the Dead, the Orson Scott Card book, doesn't really have any. It is a murder investigation, but it doesn't really have any violence in it. It turns out well, spoilers, but it turns out the murder wasn't really a matter of violence. It was a mistake. And then the other one is Dreams of a Forgotten Earth, I think it's, or Songs of a Forgotten Earth, Arthur C. Clarke. What he called his favorite book ever, his favorite of all the books he ever wrote, and there's no violence in it at all. It's a speculative, it's an imagining of a situation which might have brought up violence, but the people are wise enough to avoid it. It's actually quite a beautiful book.
Yeah, you can get an emphasis more on the political. You have literary versions of science fiction that maybe have less emphasis,
right?
Fantasy on the violence and more on the political commentary and social commentary.
So it is possible to do social commentary without resorting to violence, but those of us in the adventure circle don't want to.
I think the fun element is, is a key component there. if I think about it from the point of view of a writer, I definitely want to sort of play with the fact that, I'm going to take my characters through a situation where they're confronting things that are far more powerful than they are. They have weaponry and technology and support that is far greater than what they have. But they have good cause in the sense that, they have a good reason and motive.
We just love underdog
carving
stories.
Through that.
Right.
Yeah. And I want to figure out, I want to see them sort of take that on and figure it out. How do you, how can you win against someone who's, carrying a laser pistol and you've got a rope and a bottle?
Right. You're getting at something else that I think is fundamental to good action scene design, which is problem solving. Seeing an action scene as a puzzle that needs to be solved, right? That it is a play, exploration and elaboration and creativity, but it's also it's going to be more exciting if they have to figure out how to win, right? If it's an underdog, if it's somebody overcoming great odds using cleverness and skill. We love stories about cleverness and skill. Cleverness and skill are not contained to the fighting arena by any means, but cleverness and skill really come out when your life is on the line. Like, you can put the stakes all the way up to the top in a fight scene very easily.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun in terms of, taking your character through that whole progression. And I mean, that's like two fundamentals, the hierarchies and then the escalation of, you're going to start at a lower level of the hierarchy and then you're going to build your way up. It's actually, quite interestingly, very similar to game design, a lot of game design in a way. You might not think that you're doing that when you structure a science fiction novel and create a universe and tell a story and everything. And it's certainly not true of all stories, but it's true of a lot of fantasy and a lot of science fiction, that basically you have a kind of similar design is very obvious in a game, and it's a little bit more subtle in a book, where you're progressing through the hierarchy and going through the levels as your character and their allies and their, they may have a mentor, they may not, is kind of going through the escalating conflict, and it builds and it builds. So they might start off with a rope and a bottle, but they end up, they're going to be flying some kind of flagship with super weaponry that they've managed to capture.
Punching God in the face. Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
We start with a handful of beggars by the side of the road and get through 6 novels before we can punch God in the face. Yes, that is the classic sort of epic fantasy, 90s epic fantasy and shonen manga and Dungeons and Dragons campaign progression. They all have that kind of power leveling approach. Wheel of Time sort of follows that kind of progression. We start with 5 peasant children and build them up until they can punch God in the face. But Game of Thrones sort of does. They don't punch God in the face, but they do fight the King of the North, which is the Frost King or whatever, and that's pretty close. But you don't have to build it quite that way. But whether you're building it that way or whether you're playing in a space with the assumptions of the space, most Brandon Sanderson novels are a little bit more where it's just about setting up some preconditions of the game, laying out some rules, and then playing with those rules and playing within and it's just a game. So what would be some examples of really compelling fight scenes? Just to show like what does success look like in a fight scene? And then maybe we could also ask, what does failure look like in writing a fight scene?
Yeah, okay. Well, just before that, I was just to say, just in terms of what I was talking about, which is like the scaffolding. But the scaffolding is important, but actually what makes it interesting is the other stuff. Is how it is a commentary on technology, the society, political realities, human nature, non-human nature, I mean, that's a question that sci-fi asks a lot. What's it like to live alongside synthetic life? What's it like to have to deal with super kind of AI advanced? I mean, if we're here after 3 or 4 years, where are we going to be in like 25 years, 50 years, right? So these are really interesting things to explore. So although that's like talking about the scaffolding, what really makes it interesting is having that, but it's actually examining those things. There's a kind of exploration of those ideas and those realities through the story. So I do think, you need those two things together to make it really
They're
interesting.
deeply connected.
Yeah.
So in independent game design, we're frequently talk about something called ideological reproduction through game design, which is the school of design philosophy which recognizes that every game is essentially encoded ideology. That games encode ideology, whether you mean for them to or not. And if you're not doing it consciously, then you're doing it subconsciously. The common example of this is something like musical chairs. Musical chairs is a game for children. You play the music, they walk around the set of chairs. There's one less chair than they need for for the number of children that you have. At the end of the music, they all have to find their chair, right? And one person can't get a chair, and that person is out. Then you take away a chair, you play the music again. Well, what is this teaching? It's teaching that when the chips are down, someone gets left behind. It's teaching you to grab yours first and kick whoever doesn't get it to the curb. You could very easily teach a different ideology with this game by changing the rules, by saying when the music stops, everyone must get a seat, and it is your job to figure out how to get everyone onto the remaining chairs. Then you take a chair away once they've finished. And then the kids will build human pyramids on the one remaining chair so that everyone gets a seat at the table. This teaches a very different way of thinking about people and resources and scarcity and how to pull us along as opposed to cutting someone off. It's this way with any game design, and when you're designing the rules of your sci-fi world, you might be just doing it for fun. But somewhere in there, you are encoding the way that you see the world. Whether you're doing it consciously or subconsciously is up to you. But there's no third option. You're either thinking about it or you're doing it subconsciously. There's no third option.
It's fantastic. I love that idea of the encoding of ideology, because I think, this is what I aspire to. My idea of a writer is that someone who has actually, as much as they can, has freed themselves from their own encoded ideology, or in a way. And so they understand what it is, encoded ideology. And if you don't, then it's pretty simple. If you're born into a Christian culture and you have a Christian faith, that's because that was encoded on you as a child. If you choose it as an adult, that's different. But there are encoded ideologies that can be political, they can be religious, they can be of all sorts of different kinds. But I think it's, a writer's job is to actually understand that and be able to see it, and to be able to sort of, as much as possible, kind of perhaps free themselves from the encoded ideologies, or at least be able to represent them in their work. And that's another way that you can explore, worlds, the universe, the dynamics of politics, human nature, and all the rest of it, because you're basically seeing how the ideologies play out.
I think that short of attaining nirvana, it would be quite impossible to really be truly liberated of your own ideologies. But I do think that it is the job of speculative fiction authors, in particular fantasy and sci-fi, to try to step out of whatever you grew up in, see beyond the horizon a little bit. And that means intention. That's not just a mental exercise. That means doing the work of reading and interviewing and traveling and trying to build and challenging your own ideas to try to imagine a better world. I'm reminded of Ursula Le Guin's very famous now award acceptance speech, where she challenged the sci-fi and fantasy authors. She said, paraphrasing her, but she said something to the effect of, "We seem to have stopped imagining a better world. All our stories are about apocalypses. But we cannot build a better world unless we can first imagine it, and imagining it is the domain of storytellers."
Mm.
Challenged contemporary sci-fi and fantasy authors to try to imagine what a better world would look like, how we might somehow overcome the many problems that face us rather than succumbing to them. We have lots of cautionary tales.
Yeah.
Now, I say that. Every book I've written would qualify as a cautionary tale. I don't think that I have achieved her goal yet. It's much easier to caution against the dangers that we face than it is to actually imagine solutions.
I haven't managed it either. I'm not sure I will. Not in our time. Partly because of the way the world is, and so there's a fair amount of cautionary tale in my work as well. And maybe it's true. I mean, it is worth looking at. It is a fair point about the importance of imagining a better future and so on. I think I would suggest, there's the elements of that, the hope of that, maybe even the suggestion of the path towards that. But I wouldn't say that my particular fiction is immersed in that at all, really.
No, and
Yeah.
it may be too big a burden to shoulder all on your own, right? Like that's a big ask, actually. I hope that, if we could all start thinking about it a little bit, we might all start sort of gently pulling in that direction and maybe bend our mind to it. But in the meantime, it's actually okay to just write a fun book, right? We are in the business of entertainment. And yes, the big ideas and the social commentary are crucial. I really do think you're right. I strongly agree with you that setting the rules of the game may be the kind of essential task of building a sci-fi or fantasy world, like establishing what is true in this world and then playing the game whose rules you've set out and watching the characters interact with each other and guiding them toward more interesting outcomes. But uh, and I really agree with you when you said that choosing rules of the game and self-consciously using them as a way to satire or comment, or at least as metaphor for real world, is essential. I think we once had a big disagreement about this, and I now believe that you are right and I was wrong. Knowing what you are trying to say and having a theme is a really good idea for an author. It really just makes your job a lot easier to have an idea of what you're trying to say, rather than just following the thread of the narrative wherever it leads. If all you do is just kind of try to follow the thread of the narrative wherever it leads, there's just too many choices that you have to make that you need some mechanism to help you make that choice. And having a theme is very practical. Having a metaphor or a comparison or a bit of what's the word I'm looking for? Satire that you're attempting is very helpful. It's very practical as a writer to help you make.
I mean, it's an interesting thing. Yeah, it's an interesting area to talk about. Maybe we'll have a whole sort of podcast on that. It's not one that you'll see come up necessarily, possibly because it doesn't sound that exciting. But yeah, working with theme is like, it's a big deal. And you can really delve into that and see how that's so true of all the great, what we consider to be great science fiction and fantasy and so on, and see what themes they're working with and how they execute it and deliver on those themes. And so,
but the theme for today is fight scenes.
Fight scenes. So what makes a great fight scene? Well, I'm going to go for first thing. I'm going to go for is something that sounds pretty boring, but is actually really crucial, and that's clarity, basically. Structure and clarity, and that's not something that's, from my experience of sort of reading a lot and working with people who are writing, and from my own work, takes some doing actually. You really have to Yeah, you really have to work on that, and you really do need to, I'm afraid to say, you know, master your syntax, your story structure, your sentence structure, and its parts and what each part is doing and stuff.
That is
Not.
especially true. Sorry to
Mm,
interrupt. I just want to say
no,
that
let's go.
that's
Go ahead.
especially true in fight scenes. Story
Hmm.
syntax, structure, language. In a description of a landscape, you are free to take up a little time with poetic device, with mood and vibe, and to paint a picture, an abstraction that is beautiful on its own, and to play with language. When you're describing a fight scene, typically the speed of the scene is such that every word has to tell. It's more like poetry, and you really have to, like, any little bit that is misunderstood, and it's particularly challenging because any tiny misunderstanding of the position of a character relative to another character could completely confuse the audience. They can get completely lost if you're describing two people boxing, and in your head one of them is up on top of a chair and the other one is not. Like, the 6-inch difference between hitting somebody and missing them is all the difference in the world, and getting their positioning just right in the mind of the audience is an immense ask. So it's a time when getting your language right really matters, and focusing on your syntax, like the clarity is king. I say that often. Clarity is the ultimate goal. It is immensely difficult to say what you mean.
It is, and no one expects. I think is the other really important thing is if you're working with science fiction or fantasy, no one expects one to get it right in the first draft. Okay, I mean, if I think of
No, of
the
course not.
the fight scenes that I've written or whatever, they're probably the ones that I've been over the most. But for that very reason, to make sure each part makes sense and can be seen by a reader very, very clearly, and I am not making them work hard and overloading them with cognitive work. It's just there's a quality to it that pacing and rhythm and structure and clarity just work together. That the beats of the action kind of just really feel right, and you can really see what's happening, and then that's a much more satisfying experience for a reader. But it takes some doing. It takes some doing. It takes some doing to write that and to polish it and get it to that point. But that's fine. I mean, that's just the job, right? That's the job. But it is really important. Yeah.
I would examples of compelling fight scenes. I would list. We were talking last week about Blade Runner, the movie, not the book. They're very different. So I'm going to start with that. To go back to the Blade Runner movie, the climactic fight scene between Batty and Deckard
Mm.
is legendary. Why? Well, I mean, Deckard has been hunting these people the whole time, so we have an element of tension that's extremely necessary for those kinds of climactic fights. You really have to build the tension. But also because it's an underdog fight, so Deckard is clearly outmatched, badly outmatched. But at the same time, the fight does something where it tells us about both characters,
Mm.
where every beat of the fight is not just about who can swing a sword faster or who prefers kicks over punches, right? Like, that kind of thing honestly isn't all that interesting, even for me, and I'm a martial artist. Where that fight scene really stands out is that every beat of the fight is surprising in what it says about the personal journey of the characters who are engaging in that fight. That they
Mm.
are making decisions that are deeply motivated by what they have seen and who they are now, and the questions they're now asking about who they are. Batty is has done the thing that he set out to do. He's already killed God. He punched God in the face. In fact, he rammed his thumbs through God's eyeballs as far as he's concerned. He's done, and he's about to die. And he's now questioning, like, what is the last thing he's going to do? Is it going to be to kill this cop, or is it going to be to tell him something important? Right? And you can see him struggling with that through the whole fight as multiple influences push him in different directions. I think that's a great example of a fight scene. And notably, it has nothing to do with the choreography. Or rather, it has everything to do with the choreography, but the choreography is pursuant to the characters' identities. It is not just who can whip their knife fastest, right?
That's great. I mean, that's such a great example. I agree entirely. And that's one of the, other layers of a fight scene is that, it is part of the story. So it's not just there to serve as a fight scene, as fun, as entertaining as that can be, and as visceral and gut-wrenching and imaginary as it can be, but also it's so much also expression of character. So expression of character in terms of development as well. If you look at the arc of the development of a character, often they have gone through a lot in order to get to the point where they can take on, this ultimate sort of antagonist. And, you can then, there's a twist at the end, which is beautiful in Blade Runner. But as you said, it expresses the character of both the opposing characters beautifully well, and speaks to the underlying themes in the movie as well. So fight scene is doing all that work for you. It's not just about that. It also is about delivering on the story and expression of different characters. They fight differently. Their character comes through even partly by how they fight, or they might begin to manifest, the results of internal work. Star Wars, use of the Force, go with the Force, Luke, trust the Force, pivotal moment of awakening, shift of consciousness in a battle, right? So the internal transformation is manifesting there at a total climax point within that story. So they do a lot of, work. It's the fun, it's the character, it's the delivery of the themes of the story. So yeah,
when it's good,
all there.
When it's good, it's playing with the premise that's been set out. So playing within the rules of the game. And everyone has at least some familiarity with the rules of fisticuffs, right? Like, even if you've never done that, you live in a meat suit, you know what its limits are. But then playing with the rules of the sci-fi on top of that. So you're playing in that space. You're also, as with any other scene in a book, you're telling the characters' stories. So it's on top of doing that, it's also pushing their experience forward and changing them. They're pushing on the world, and the world is pushing on them, and they're becoming someone new as they are challenged by those circumstances. And then on top of all of that, it's also just fun. It's spectacle, right? Like, you can do it because it's titillating. You can do it because it's spectacle. You can do it because it's commentary on the characters and on the character's identity and personality. And you can do it because it's playful with the rules of the space. And all four of those are completely valid reasons to want to put a fight scene in your book, or to put any other scene in your book, for that matter. But it would be wise, I think, since we're in the business of making advice to other authors, I think it's a very good idea to do at least two of those things, right? Yeah. That if your fight is only in there because it's titillating, then it's going to be a little boring. It should always be commentary on the character's identity and where they are and how they feel about things, especially fights, because the stakes are high in a fight by definition. Even if you are incredibly good, you could slip on a rock and lose your life, right? Like, it's when the stakes are that high, no one, no matter how cocky, should be just assured of solution, right?
You've just raised a really important point there, right? This is so crucial. And maybe from a writer's point of view, it's one of the more difficult things to handle, and that is cost,
Right.
jeopardy.
Yeah.
You can have tension. You can always build tension and so on, because of the threat and, walking into a ship that you don't know and there's some noise and something is there and
Right.
we all know it's going to be really bad.
Right.
You turn the next corner.
You can build tension in a lot of different ways,
Yeah, and
atmosphere
you're
and
on your
vibe,
own,
and right.
and I've watched these scenes and I've thought, oh my God, I genuinely would not want to be there, and I'd love to be on a spaceship, believe me. So you can build tension, but when you work with a main character, how do you have cost, right? Okay, I mean, it's like you are in the position where probably you're not going to kill off your main character. So then there probably isn't going to be the ultimate cost of them losing their life. Everything else is up for grabs. Their limbs, their sanity, their friends, their family, their society,
And it
their
is
sense of right
important
and wrong,
to take the
right?
time to set up what is at stake.
Yeah, right.
And to make, ideally, to give the audience enough time with whatever is going to be at stake in the fight scene that they care about those stakes, right? There's a world of difference between I'm fighting to protect my spouse, who you've never met, and I just say that to you, compared to I'm fighting to protect my spouse, who we've spent 3 or 6 or 12 chapters getting to know, falling in love with. We just had the wedding scene. Right. So there's just such a difference. And really, it boils down to time, time on the page and value to the reader.
Yeah. So as you say, you have to set up that. It becomes far less interesting, even if it's great action sequence and stuff. It basically, your main character or characters can go through it all and there's no cost. Jeopardy is there anyway, and there's a risk and so on, but you never show cost, then that can become problematic, I think.
Yeah.
So
I would
you gotta figure that out.
I would put fight scenes generally into 2 pretty distinctive camps. You can have the fight scenes like the one at the end of Blade Runner, where everything is on the line, and they are built up with all due tension. There is massive stakes regards to identity or things that we care about that have been put on the line. That is one kind of fight scene. You can also do fight scenes that are not that intense, that come much earlier in the draft, and whose job is to establish your character's appetite for risk, their skill level, and what they consider to be low stakes. So you can have like a lighthearted, like a James Bond film might open with a fight scene because it would or a spy novel might open with a fight scene. I actually don't think that opening with a fight scene is a very good idea. I think that, but that's a topic for a different conversation, for a different day, perhaps. But
Yeah.
but you can have with basically no stakes. If you've had no time, then you have no stakes. So if you haven't spent time establishing the stakes, then they aren't there for the audience. But you can still have fight scenes very early in the draft. They just do something different. They're fun, and they're showing something about your character's appetite for risk and their ability to handle danger.
Yeah. You can't have every fight scene, particularly earlier on in the story, sort of having a significant cost. I mean, so it's usually there's a culmination at some point. There is some meaningful cost, so that there's a real sense that things can be lost here, and they're very often not in the first 20%, 25% of the book, because you, just for the reason you said, in terms of establishing what that cost is going to be, that it will be meaningful. You will feel it as a reader. Actually, you feel it as a writer. Thinking about how my particular main character, the cost to him, pretty severe. And it affected me as well, actually. I still think about it. So that's what you want, right? It has to have a sort of real meaningful impact. Before
Putting
we sort of
something at
start
risk is
to
crucial.
wrap up, yeah. If you want, I just want to give an example. I think Richard K. Morgan is a very good writer of action and action scenes, and does display a lot of the things that we've been talking about in terms of the different layers that are going on in different action scenes. And of course, we haven't mentioned it, but of course, the descriptive power is really important.
Right. The
Part of
spectacle.
it. The spectacle, the
In
description.
books, it's language. When an author is really good with language, that becomes its own form of spectacle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is Altered Carbon. You might have seen, you'd be aware of the television series. The book is really good. And yeah, so I certainly have, studied them myself, and that's fair enough. You go and you study. If you think someone's a great action writer, you study why. You read their thing and you think, oh yeah, this is partly why, and this is, something of an inspiration for your own writing, and that's fair enough, I think.
Do you want to read us an example?
Oh, right. Yes, I could do. Yeah. All right. So he's just been kidnapped. I'm trying to get out of it. After a few minutes, the woman told me, take off the blindfold. I pushed it up onto my forehead and noticed it. Oh, hang on a sec. I pushed it up onto my forehead and retied it there in its customary position. At my side, the muscle with the machine pistol smirked. I gave him a curious look. Something funny? Yeah. The woman spoke without turning her gaze from the city lights behind the window. You look like a idiot. Not where I'm from. She turned to look at me pityingly. You aren't where you are from. You're on Earth. Try behaving like it. I looked from one to the other of them. The pistolier still smirking, the synthetic with the expression of polite contempt, then shrugged and reached up with both hands to untie the bandana. The woman went back to watching the lights of the city sink below us. The rain seemed to have stopped. I chopped down stubbornly from head height, left and right. My left foot jarred into the pistolier's temple with enough force to break the bone, and he slumped sideways with a simple grunt. He never even saw the blow coming. My right arm was still in motion. The synthetic whipped around, probably faster than I could have struck, but she misread me. Her arm was raised to block and cover her head, and I was under the guard, reaching. My hand closed on the blaster at her belt, knocked out the safety and triggered it. The beam seethed into life, cutting downward, and a large quantity of the woman's right leg burst open in wet ropes of flesh before the blowback circuits cut the blood blast. She howled, a cry more rage than of pain, and then I dragged the muzzle of the weapon up, triggering another blast diagonally across her body. The blaster carved a channel, bandwidth, wide right through her, a handbreadth wide right through her and into the seat behind. Blood exploded across the cabin. The plaster cut out again, and the cabin went suddenly dim as the flaring of the beam weapon stopped. Beside me, the synthetic woman bubbled and sighed, and then the section of her torso that the head was attached to sagged away from the left side of her body. Her forehead came to rest against the window she had been looking out of. It looked oddly as if she was cooling her brow on the rain street glass. The rest of the body sat stiffly upright, the massive sloping wound cauterized clean by the beam. The mingled stink of cooked meat and fried synthetic components was everywhere. Yeah. Vivid and visceral. And brief.
This reads to me as, I have not read this book, but this one reads to me very much as in that second category of fight scenes that happen early in the book to establish the character's competence, appetite for risk, and general kind of sense of where they fit into the hierarchy of martial capabilities in their world.
Exactly.
This
it is early in the book, yeah.
This scene demonstrates that this character is extremely willing to commit violence, much more even than the thugs who kidnapped him were expecting. And that the character is pretty cold-hearted. It takes a real divorcing of yourself from your sense of empathy to just like kill someone in cold blood, even if they've kidnapped you. This is setting up a person who is going to need to make some human connections, or they will find themselves in a very dark place. So we're seeing in this scene that this character has a journey that they need to go on, but it's probably not a journey of learning to become more violent.
No, but it's a journey that requires a lot of violence, and a lot of violence is visited on the character.
Yeah.
And it is classic cyberpunk in many ways in terms of the corporate overlords and the iniquity of the society and all the rest of it. And he's carving a way through it. Actually, investigating a murder as well.
I do think cyberpunk in particular is a genre known for its extreme violence. Because the themes of cyberpunk deal with the commodification of bodies and the question of what even is a soul in a world where your body can be bought and sold in cybernetic parts or genetic enhancement, et cetera, et cetera. So in a world where bodies are commodified, there is an inherent violence to that concept, and it tends to be portrayed overtly in the cyberpunk genre as martial arts, in addition to everything else going on.
Yeah.
An interesting thing about... Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, it's called altered carbon, and humans are the altered carbon. And so you have synthetic life forms. You have the idea of that you can extract the consciousness and essence of a person and stack it, put it in a stack. And so he's actually being brought back from being 100 or 200 years in sort of a prison, in a way, as a sentence for previous crimes as a rebel, and has been brought back to investigate a murder because of the experience and skills and that brings with him, but is given a new body in order to do that. So it does sort of explore all those classic elements of what it is to be human, different kinds of life forms, and what you mentioned, replaceability of the human form and enhancements and all the rest of it, playing out in this classic cyberpunk sort of background universe. But it's done well. You'll find those elements in many, many stories, but it's what you do with them. It's like how well you do with them. And I think he does really well with them. Yeah.
It's even encoded into that brief scene, the difference in the kind of violence he directs toward a person versus a synthetic. While he punched that guy in the temple, he didn't kill him or blast him apart, right? The synthetic, on the other hand, had to be destroyed with the advanced weapon, or it was just too dangerous to try to do any other way. But also the synthetic is not destroyed. This insane amount of violence done to this body, it's a robot, it can be rebuilt, right? The context of the scene is sort of explored a little bit in the way that he navigates through it.
Yeah, replaceability. I mean, that's one of the interesting things. I mean, in a sense, that's part of what can give you more latitude. I mean, that's interesting how science fiction writers or fantasy writers give themselves scope. You know, when I think about, you know, one of the advantages of writing a fantasy in terms of action, we haven't spoken about that much, is that most fantasy is in a sort of medieval world. Or when you're in a medieval world, you're going to be you're going to be, you know, using spears and swords and shields and up close and personal. And so, yeah, that gives you a lot of descriptive and visceral sort of possibility, because we use it as a phrase. He went medieval on him, you know, because of that. Because of the medieval warfare, which is like so brutal and horrific in a way. But then you can, yeah, obviously you can create other kind of powers to play with in that universe, dragons, for instance, or magic or whatever. So you can have other dimensions, although you don't have, I mean, that could give you sort of like you bows and arrows and so on, but can't be firing off lasers that can travel at the speed of light right across a battlefield and things like that. So, you know, magic is a replacement of that to a certain degree. So, but that's the thing of building these powers and the hierarchy of them in your particular world, so that they come out to play and they make sense in your universe. There's nothing worse when that system is broken. And you'll find that fantasy writers, sci-fi writers talk about that quite a bit, where it can go wrong if you break the system. If you suddenly, like if you're a big studio and you write into a script that, oh, we can take out, you know, major dreadnought ships simply by going into light speed and destroying them. Oh, why haven't anyone ever thought of that before?
Yeah. Why don't we have lightspeed torpedoes then? Let's just put a hyperdrive on a missile.
Yeah,
right.
And it's a sci-fi writer. You're like, oh my goodness, oh no, you just destroyed the hierarchy. That makes sense.
That does not work.
Internal logic.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
If it was that easy, they would have been doing it that way already.
Right.
Yeah. Brandon Sanderson. I'll quote Brandon Sanderson. He has a famous quote. He says, "Your character's ability to solve a problem with magic is proportionate to the audience's understanding of how magic works." In other words, you really can't use magic to solve a problem unless the audience understands what the limitations of that magic are, and why they can't solve every problem with it, right? I think there are some counterexamples. The Harry Potter franchise is sort of famous for this. No one understands how the magic works. So in theory, you cannot solve any problems with it. And in fact, they don't solve any problems with magic ever. They solve their problems with sleight of hand and athletic skill, dodging and flying their broomsticks around. They don't solve problems by their mastery or understanding of magic, which is, I guess, a more familiar way to solve problems, but it does seem kind of odd to have a whole book about living at a magic school and never actually learn how any magic works.
Yeah, you have to be careful with that, actually. I mean, that can get a little bit frustrating. I even found that to be the case to a certain degree in Lord of the Rings. You know, there are some pretty powerful scenes where magic's used, but it's pretty minimal throughout the whole story.
Yeah, I think the Lord of the Rings is a good example of a world in which magic is very subtle. And where it does show up, it is almost exclusively in the domain of inspiring people or inspiring fear in people. It's sort of fear and courage are the two primal forces of magic that happen in The Lord of the Rings. The ring wraiths will show up and people become afraid and make mistakes. Gandalf or Glorfindel or Aragorn will shine a light and people become courageous and start fighting back. And that's it. That's what, I mean, every now and then Gandalf does something to remind you that he's a wizard. but that's it.
But not a lot.
Not
actually.
a lot.
Not a huge amount. No.
Yeah.
But it's handled well. I
Yeah.
think it's successful because of the way that the obviously Tolkien structured it and it delivered on it in really, really great promise. I think probably where, we can go into another, like, I don't know, a second kind of podcast on this area at some point, but
for sure. Yeah, we could talk all day,
kind of,
but we're coming to the end of our time. So any final thoughts, Stuart?
Well, I think find the writers that you really, inspire you, and that. I mean, for we all have our writers, and I have a few, and I just particularly like the way they go about handling action, and I try to learn from them. Actually, I really do. I read and read over, and I study it, and I try to learn it, and then I measure my work against theirs, be straight up honest about it, and see whether I feel as though I'm kind of like getting close to their mastery of writing action and giving it meaning, descriptive power, clarity, that when I read it, I see it, and my brain's not working hard, and I feel it, and it sort of really delivers for me, and that's what I'm trying to do in my work. And so it really helps to study and read writers that really do that for you. I think that can be a very inspirational and good thing.
I agree with that, of course. Read books and keep your brain turned on. Make note of what works to you and continue with it. But my final thought on the subject of fight scenes for today, we have much more to say on the subject, I suppose, but my final thought for today is I've often heard sci-fi and fantasy authors say that if you want to write good fight scenes, you should practice some martial arts. And I don't think that's true. I think that's actually bad advice. I spent 20 years of my life practicing martial arts. I practiced a variety of different martial arts, and most of the martial arts studios that I went to were full of misapprehensions. And they taught me more things that were wrong than really things that were right about describing fight scenes. I think mostly people don't care that much about what kind of punch they're throwing, or their pacing or distancing, what kind of kick it is, etc. That's, even for me as a martial artist, I don't care about that. As a writer, if you really want to write good fight scenes, I think that you should focus on building tension and understanding what the characters' motivations and conflicts are in the scene, and how their choices through the fight are influenced by who they are and what they believe and what they have yet to learn. So somebody's a master rapier fighter, fighting a fencing fighter, like a Three Musketeers sort of character. You don't need to learn all the épée forms and names for fencing things. I think that would be a waste of your time. Instead, you want to focus on how they think about fighting and what will convince them to want to fight. I think that's a much more interesting fight from someone who isn't a martial artist than somebody who spends a couple of years in a dojo and comes away with more misapprehensions than they started with. So that's my final thought. Stuart, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for your company. We'll see you next time.
We'll be continuing and with a new subject. We'll see you next time. Yeah. Enjoy. And you're doing some martial arts. That's like, it's good exercise and it's good for you, I'm sure. And
absolutely,
have fun with it, and then do
good
some
skills
writing.
to have. Yeah. Good skills to have.
Okay. Good skills to have. Yeah. Yeah. Especially in the world as it's going. All right.
Cheers,
Bye,
everyone.
Everybody.